The graphic that you see behind me is also in banner form on either side of the auditorium. And those banners as well are in poster form hanging up in the teen room. And they serve as 6 goals for the youth ministry. And so everything that we do in the youth ministry, we try to filter through these goals. And I could talk more about that. I'm pretty passionate about it. But if you want to know more information about that, get with me afterwards. And 2 weeks ago, Richard did a lesson on this particular banner. And his text for that lesson was 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 17 and 18. And the idea there was that we are to grow in grace and grow in our knowledge of who God is. And that was a wonderful sermon. If you haven't had a chance to listen to it, if you weren't here, then I would highly recommend that you go back and listen to that. But in this banner is that statement underneath. I don't know if you can see it, but it says that we want you to grow in your faithfulness to God and your knowledge of the Scriptures. Did I say that right? Your knowledge of His Scriptures. I can't see it very well back there. And I want to focus on this for this morning, and I want us to look at that first part of that, where we want you to grow in your faithfulness, and more specifically, I want us to focus on the word faithfulness and understanding what faithfulness means and how that applies to our lives as the children of God, to our lives as Christians. And as I started digging into that word and understanding faithfulness, and I was reading through that and doing a lot of different studying throughout the course of the week, I finally went into Clint's office and said, have you ever had a lesson just blow up on you? From the standpoint of you keep digging and you keep learning more and you keep finding out more, and then you have to get to that point where you say, I've got to start cutting stuff. Because these people here, right, Clint? These people here won't like to be here for 2 hours. And so I'm going to limit myself to 3 points, okay? Because there is a lot here when it comes to faithfulness and what faithfulness means and how it can apply to our lives. So first, let's start off by defining what faithfulness is. If you were to look up the definition of faithfulness on your smartphone, I use Google all the time, so this is Google's online dictionary. All of whatever your favorite online dictionary is, will come up with something similar. And so the first definition is that faithfulness is the quality of being loyal and steadfast. That's something we can get behind, right? Loyalty and steadfastness, being resolute in what we believe and doing what we say we're gonna do, being steadfast in that regard. The second definition that Google spits out is the quality of being sexually faithful to a spouse or partner, fidelity. We can get behind that one to a certain degree, and I'm going to explain that here in a second. But the quality of being faithful, the idea of fidelity, that's important, especially when it comes to marriage. What that means and what that looks like, that's faithfulness. We can get behind that. Or the third definition that Google spits out is the quality of being true to the facts or the original. The idea of understanding what is factual and what is false and being faithful to those facts. We can get behind something like that, right? And so we can get a good idea of what faithfulness is just by Googling the definition. But when you start to look at faithfulness from the standpoint of what the Bible says about faithfulness and how the Bible defines faithfulness, it kind of opens up a whole nother world to us and what that looks like. And so faithfulness, when we come to this, it's used as a noun. Those are two words there, emet and emunah, that are used for faithfulness. And so it's someone or something that is trustworthy and faithful. And in the terms of emet, it's used to define trustworthiness or constancy. I had to look up that word. Constancy means being dependable or faithful. Okay? So faithfulness and truth. And that word is used in the Hebrew Bible 127 times. Emunah, which is steadfastness, trustworthiness, faithfulness, honesty, a permanent position. Another way that word or the Hebrew uses the word faithfulness is emunah, and it's used 49 times. Now, the root word there for the Hebrew word for faithfulness is used in various forms in terms of verbs or adverbs and in particles and whatnot. And so when you add all of those up, the words that are used to define and to determine what faithfulness is used 329 times in the Hebrew Bible. Now, you may be asking yourselves, why in the world does this matter to me? I get that. Here's why it matters to you. When we come across things in the Bible, whether it's terms or words or different concepts, and they're repeated, especially a certain number of times, the more they're repeated, the more importance it has. Or at least it should send up a flag to us to say, hey, I really need to look into this and to study this a little bit more. And so when we come across faithfulness and it's used 329 times, that should be a flag for us that goes up and says, there's something here. And there is. And so here's the 3 points. I promise. I don't want to get too technical or scholarly here because your brains might start hurting like mine was hurting this week. All right? So faithfulness. Let's look at faithfulness as a characteristic of who God is. And when you look at Exodus chapter 34, verse 6, the text there says, the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, and faithfulness. Now, when you look at that verse, you're like, oh, wow, faithfulness is in there, and there's a point here. But in order to understand this verse, you have to understand this verse in the context of what's happening. And so when you look at Exodus chapter 34, if you want to open your Bibles there, you'll see this very clearly. And look at chapter 32, what we have happening here is this scene of the golden calf. Moses is up on Mount Sinai, and he's meeting with God, and it's at that time that Moses is receiving the first set of the tablets of the Ten Commandments. And he's up there a while because the Israelite people come to Aaron and say, we have no idea what has become of Moses. And what they're really saying is, we don't know if he's died or if he's abandoned us, if he's just left. We have no idea where Moses has been at. He's been gone long enough for them to draw those conclusions, right? And so they tell Aaron, they say, Aaron, fashion for us gods that will lead us. And so Aaron thinks that, okay, well, this is a great idea. So he collects gold from them, and from that gold he creates this golden calf, and they set up a time to worship this golden calf. And during this time, God sees what is happening while he's meeting with Moses. And the text tells us that his wrath he's burning with wrath, and he wants to consume his people from the face of the earth. That's a nice way of saying he wants to wipe them out because he is so angry at what they are doing. They are forsaking who he is as God and rebelling against him and replacing him as God. And when that happens, Moses steps in there in verse 11 of chapter 32, and he intercedes for the people, and he says, God, you can't wipe them away from the face of the earth. Because one, what would the Egyptians say? That you just led your people out to the wilderness to destroy them? How would that look to the Egyptians? But second, is that you made a covenant with Abraham and with Isaac and with Jacob. And you promised these people that they would be as numerous as the stars and that they would have this land that you promised them. And then the text tells us that God relents and he decides not to punish his people. And so then Moses goes down and deals with the situation with the golden calf and everything. And then the next day he comes back to God and he says, what are we to do? And God tells him, you're going to pack everything up and my angel is going to lead you into the promised land. But I'm not going with you. And when the Israelite nation hears this, they begin to mourn and to cry out in distress because their God, the one true God, is not going to lead them into the promised land. And in the middle there of chapter 33, verse 7, Moses goes to this tent of meeting. It's a tent that is set up on the outside of the encampment where people could go there and meet God. And so Moses goes out to the tent of meeting to meet with God and to intercede for the people once more. And to say, God, if I have found favor in your eyes, which I have, and you have even told me that you know my name, God, you know who these people are, and you've chosen them. You've got to lead them into the promised land. And so we see there at the end of chapter 33 that God is going to do that. And when you look at verse 18 or verse 17, you see that. And then Moses, it's like he's asking God, he says, please show me your glory. Once God says, I will lead this nation into the promised land, it's as if Moses is asking and saying, okay, God, I know that you're saying that, but show me your glory so that I know that what you're saying is true. And so God says, I will do that. I will show you my goodness and my graciousness and my mercy. This is what the text tells us, which are the same words that we find here in this verse. And I will pass by you. You won't see my face, but you'll be able to see my back. And you will see my glory. And so God calls, in chapter 34, God calls Moses back up on the Mount Sinai, and he puts him in the cleft of that rock. And he passes before Moses, and Moses is able to step out and see the back of God. And God says this, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. That idea that he is trustworthy and we can believe and know that what he is saying is true. He is dependable in this. Now it's interesting that the word faithfulness is at the end of this list. And I think that's important because it shows that God is going to show his faithfulness in his mercy and show his faithfulness in his graciousness and show his faithfulness in the fact that he will be slow to anger and show his faithfulness in his abounding love. That's important because this is not a one-time act. Because when you put this in the context of the greater story of 32, 34, and 32, 33, and 34, you see that what God is saying is that I'm not going to show my mercy to you just this once because you made that golden calf. I'm not going to show my graciousness to you just this once because you made this golden calf. I am not just going to have love for you just after this incident when you had this golden calf. No, it is going to extend beyond time, and I will show this to you over and over and over again throughout time, and I will be faithful to that. And we see that throughout the Old Testament and the fulfillment of that in Jesus Christ in the New Testament. And God is faithful in all of those areas, not just once, not just after that incident, but throughout time. Now I want us to look at a couple other verses that show faithfulness on the part of who Moses is and a couple other individuals, but it'll apply to God. So hang with me here. In Exodus chapter 17, we have this scene where Moses is leading the people through the wilderness, and they come upon the Amalekites, and they are fighting them. And whenever Moses' hands are being held up, the Israelites are winning. Whenever his hands begin to fall, then they're losing. And so verse 11 here of chapter 17 in Exodus, whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. And whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew weary, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and one on the other side. So his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. His hands were steady. That's also the Hebrew word that can be translated as faithfulness. So we get an idea and an understanding, a deeper understanding there, another layer to what faithfulness is. It has steadiness to it. It is steady. It is something that is steady. I don't know if I can say that any other way. It was funny when I said that. Anyways. And then we have Isaiah chapter 39, verse 8, where Hezekiah and Isaiah, the king of Israel, and the prophet Isaiah are having a back and forth. And Hezekiah says this to Isaiah, "The word the Lord that you have spoken is good." For he thought, there will be peace and security in my days. The word there for security is also the Hebrew word that can be translated as faithfulness. And so there we see that faithfulness brings about an idea or the concept of security, that one is secure. And so when you put that together and you apply that to the understanding of what faithfulness is and to faithfulness as a character of who God is, at the end of Moses' life in Deuteronomy chapter 32, he says this, the rock, speaking of who God is. Now when you think of a rock, it's not the rocks that are out here in front of the building that are the landscape rocks, right? Those are the little rocks you can pick up and throw. Now this is a huge boulder that's immovable. Maybe a better way to think of it is when they build large buildings, they'll dig down and put the foundation on bedrock. It's immovable. It is a foundation that is steady. And so the idea here that Moses is evoking is that God is an immovable object. He is steady, and there is stability within that. And so the rock, His work is perfect, for all His ways are justice, a God of faithfulness, without iniquity, just and upright is He. I'm only scratching the surface here when it comes to faithfulness as a characteristic of who God is. There is so much more here that we could dig into, but this begins to give you an idea of this characteristic in terms of how it is applied to God. Let's look at this from the standpoint of who we are. So faithfulness as a human characteristic. When you look at Joshua chapter 24, verses 14 and 15, which Hunter read for us this morning, now therefore fear the Lord and serve Him in sincerity and in faithfulness. We're at the end of Joshua's life here in the end of the book of Joshua. And he has called the Israelite nation together, and he's telling them, today, choose who you will serve. Whether it's going to be the gods beyond the river or the gods back in Egypt, which your fathers worshipped, or the gods of the Amorites that are here in this land, or the one true God that has led us from Egypt through the wilderness and into this promised land. Choose this day who you will serve. But it's not just about choosing who they will serve, but also choosing and how they will serve God. And so choosing that they would serve God in sincerity and in faithfulness. So faithfulness is a characteristic of who we are as children of God, is something that we choose to do and something that we can grow in. And something that we can learn and grow in and get better at over time, if that makes sense. So let's dig into this a little bit more. In 2 Kings chapter 12, verse 15, this is where King Josiah is rebuilding the temple of the Lord. And they've collected a lot of different gold and money and things like that to make the different articles that are needed for the temple of the Lord. And it says here in verse 15, and they did not ask for an accounting from the men into whose hand they delivered the money to pay out to the workmen, for they dealt honestly. They didn't have to worry about what was being done with that money. They didn't have to worry about what was being done with that gold and if somebody was coming and stealing it or misappropriating it and giving more money to this person versus this person or anything like that. They didn't worry about it because they dealt honestly, which is also the Hebrew word that can be translated as, you're getting the idea. It can be translated as faithfulness. So it's this idea that in terms of who we are as the children of God, that when we are faithful, we are honest in how we deal with other people. We have a sense of integrity about us and that we want to speak the truth, and our actions also show that there is truth behind what we are doing. And that we're not trying to deceive people and be dishonest, because faithfulness requires honesty. Another way to look at this, Exodus chapter 18, going back to Moses. Moses is having to deal with the Israelite nation. And as people have their quarrels and things like that, he's the one that sits in judgment on those instances. And Jethro, his father-in-law, sees what's happening. And Jethro tells Moses, this is not good. This is not healthy for you. And in verse 21, he says, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. The word trustworthy there. Look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy, who do what they say they're going to do, who will help you out because you know that you can trust them because they are people that are to be trusted and that they are honest. And so it's this idea of faithfulness. Again, that is the Hebrew word that can be translated as faithfulness. We're getting it. Let's consider faithfulness as truth. Faithfulness can also denote this idea that it is truth when it comes to the reality of the situation. in terms of what is false and what is true. And so faithfulness as truth. In Genesis chapter 42, we have the scene where Joseph has his brothers before him, and his younger brother Benjamin is still back with their father. And Joseph wants to see his younger brother. And he says this, "Send one of you and let him bring your brother while you remain confined, that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you. Or else, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." And again, that word, that you may be tested, whether there is truth in you. That word for truth is the Hebrew word for faithfulness. And the idea here is that Joseph wants to make sure that everything that they are saying is true. And so he sets this up where one of them will go back and bring Benjamin back just to show and to prove that they are not spies. Because he wants to see the reality of what that truth is and to make sure that what they are saying is true. So when it comes to faithfulness as truth, we determine what that truth is, and we live in the hard facts of that. It's not just, well, this is how I feel or this is what I think. No, there's facts behind it and why we are able to say what is true and what is not. Stick with me here. 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 6, the Queen of Sheba is coming to visit King Solomon. And she's heard all of these things about Solomon, and he's full of wisdom, and he's world-renowned, and she wants to come visit King Solomon. And she says this when she meets him, "The report was true that I heard in my own land of your words and of your wisdom. The things I heard about weren't just made up. They weren't fanciful things that people were saying. When I got here and I saw for myself, I saw that it was real and therefore it was true." And that word for true is also the word that can be translated as faithfulness. Let's go back to Joshua 24, verses 14 and 15. "Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." What Joshua is challenging the Israelite nation with, he's telling them to follow and to serve that which is true. He's asking them to choose that which is true versus that which is false. And to live in that reality, in the essence of the fact that God is the one true God, the one and only God, the God that led you out of Egypt through the wilderness and into the promised land, and you know that those things are true because your ancestors lived it, and it is factual. But instead, he's having to have this conversation with the Israelite nation and saying, choose that which is true or choose that which is false. Because you know that the gods of the Egyptians or the gods beyond the river or the gods of the Amorites in this land in which you now reside in, which was promised to you, they did not lead you. So choose that which is true. And if you think that's evil, then choose that which is false. I think of that Google definition with regards to faithfulness to your spouse or a partner. You see, we live in a society that is struggling with this concept of faithfulness as what is true or what is truth. And that we live in a society that says, well, this group of people thinks this way or believes this way, and therefore it is true for them. Or this group of people thinks this way and lives their lives this way, and that is true for them. And so we have that definition where it says the idea of faithfulness, of being faithful to your spouse or a partner, that can mean anything based on how I feel or based on how you feel. But when it comes to the reality of truth, and if we are going to choose that which is true, which is who God is, which is also another characteristic of God, Him being truth, then we are choosing to follow God and say that this, His Word, God and His Word will be my standard of truth by which I will live by. No matter how hard that may be or how much I have to wrestle with that because of the way I feel or the way I think. That when I choose to follow God, the one true God, the God that we know factually led the Israelite nation out of Egypt through the wilderness and into the promised land, we are saying we are going to live by His standard of morality. No matter how hard that may be or how much I have to wrestle with that. You see, faithfulness as a characteristic of who God is that He is true and He is truth. And faithfulness is a characteristic that we are striving for because we want to strive to be made and formed into the image of Jesus, God's Son, is truth. And so we must be striving for that and strive to grow in our faithfulness to God. Let me illustrate it two different ways. We have a dog at home. It is the neediest, clingiest dog you will ever meet. I think that dog was made to just annoy me. She's a sweet dog. She's a mini golden doodle. She's not so mini. She is golden in color, but I don't know that she's all that golden. We have worked a tremendous deal in training that dog so that we can enjoy that dog. And so when we go out into the backyard, and our backyard backs up to the common area and where there's a playground and we can go out the gate in the backyard, we've trained that dog to know that she cannot go out the gate unless she's called. And so when we go out into the common area and we're out there playing, we see her sitting there, we're like, oh, hey, yeah, you can come out here. Or when we go out to the front yard to get the mail and we're hanging out in the front yard or whatever it is and the front door is open, that dog is sitting at the front door. She's not coming out unless she hears the words, come or here. Those are the two commands. And she knows that she can come out and be a part of the fun, if you will. And so this past week, I was blowing out my sprinkler systems. And to get to the valves at the front of my house, there's a side gate on our house, and I had that open so I could walk back and forth to check on the air compressor and make sure I'm not blowing up my sprinkler lines, right? And I'm opening up those valves, and I left that side gate open. And at night, what I usually do is when we're getting ready to go to bed, I'll take Molly, that's her name, and I'll let her outside, and I'll sit there and contemplate the day's events or look at the sports scores or read news or something like that. And she'll scratch on the back door. It's a sliding glass door, and to say, hey, I'm done, I'm ready. And I'll let her in and go into and she'll go into her kennel, and I go to bed. Now, sometimes she takes a couple of minutes. Sometimes she takes 5 or more. And when it takes a little bit longer, I'll get up and look out the back door, and usually she's sitting right there because she's ready to come back in. Or if I open the door, she'll come running back in. Well, I'm sitting there and I'm reading, and I'm looking through the news and everything, and I realize it's been like 20 minutes, and she's not back. And I go and I look out our sliding glass door, the back door, she's not sitting there. I open up the door, and she doesn't come running. I step outside. I'm looking in my backyard. It's not a big backyard, and she is nowhere to be found. So I start to whistle for her. And pretty soon, I hear my dog walking through the gravel, which is on the side of our house, and she comes around the corner. And I go and I look, and I had left that gate open. That silly dog was just sitting there, looking out at the front yard, just enjoying the evening. Because she knew what her boundaries were and that she could not go into the front yard unless she was called. Now, I'm not ascribing the fact that we all need to be a bunch of dogs and trained in that way, but here's the fact, is that we need to understand what God expects of us in His Word, and we need to live up to that standard in our faithfulness to Him. Think of it this way. 2 boys were outside playing in the snow. It had just snowed 4 or 5 inches. I should have said 6 or 7. It had snowed 4 or 5 inches, and they're out there playing, and the younger brother looks at the older brother, and he says, hey, let's see if we can make a straight line in the snow. And the older brother thinks about it just for a moment and he says, that's a great idea, let's do it. And so the older brother, what he does, he looks straight at a tree in the yard and he begins to walk, not taking his eyes off of the tree. And the younger brother sees what his older brother's doing and he begins to do the same thing. He starts walking towards the tree, but he wants to see how well he's doing. And so he looks behind him. And then he looks at the tree and keeps walking. And he looks behind him and he looks at the tree and he keeps walking. And they get to the end, and both boys, the older brother's already standing there, and the younger brother gets there and they turn and they look. The older brother's line is straight as an arrow, and the younger brother's line, and he notices that it's zigzagging across the yard back to that tree. And so the younger brother asks the older brother, he says, how did you walk in such a straight line? He said, well, it's pretty easy. I just put my eyes on the tree and I walked. And I didn't take my eyes off of the tree until I was finished. And when I turned and saw that my line was straight, I was watching what you were doing, and you wanted to see how well you were doing. And you kept turning back and looking to see how straight your line was. You were taking your eyes off of the mark that you needed to walk to. And so you were zigzagging. When we want to grow in our faithfulness to God and grow in that characteristic, then we've got to keep our eyes on Him. The Hebrew writer would say it this way. I like how the NIV says it, and I'm just paraphrasing here. In Hebrews chapter 13, it says to fix our eyes on the author and perfecter of our faith, Jesus Christ. And if we're trying to strive to be like Him and to be formed into His image, then we have got to do that, especially if we want to grow in our faithfulness to God. I don't know what you need this morning. Maybe it's this idea or this concept that you need to grow in your faithfulness and you just need encouragement from the congregation. And you need people to pray for you and pray with you. Maybe it's that you realize part of my faithfulness deals with me being baptized and putting on Jesus Christ in baptism to have my sins washed away. And that is a part of our faithfulness and who we are as Christians and who we are as children of God. Whatever it may be for you today, if you want to put on Christ in baptism or you just need encouragement of the congregation, would you come as we stand and sing?